us the plight of poor farmers. She told us the story of farmers that are committing suicide at high rates because the debt is up to their ears. The problems they have from farm bankruptcies and the lack of health care and poverty. She said those Kansas farmers are going to organize with those Carolina Fast Fight for 15 workers. We know what we must do. And so Congressman John Paul and Congressman Lee and all of you that are here, this is what we commit to support this agenda. We will mobilize poor and low wealth people and voters all over this land, of every race, creed, color, people of faith, no faith. We know poor and low wealth people make up 30% of the electorate now. 65 million people. We know that in 15 states, 1 to 25% of poor and low wealth people that are already registered to vote, if they voted, 1 to 25% voted that didn't vote, they can determine who holds every office. Last June, we held a mass Poor People's Assembly Moral March on Washington virtually with 300 partners, 1,500 prophetic clergy council, and 2.4 million people showed up online last June and said we must demand this nation fully address poverty and low wealth. On Monday, we will have a national town hall. You will be joining us as this resolution is introduced. Next month, on June 21st, on Monday, tomorrow Monday, we will launch 365 days of mobilizing towards a mass poor people's low-wage workers assembly and moral march on Washington in person for June 2022. Because we're going to put a face on poverty. And we promise you that next June 22, you will not hear about people pontificating about the poor. You will hear the poor and low wealth speaking themselves, and laying out their power and shifting the narrative. You will see that collection that we say can't come together. White folk from Appalachia and black folk from Alabama and people from California and the Carolinas. And so I close. We know what we have to do. We must have a third reconstruction to fully address poverty and low wealth from the bottom up. And to those that may criticize, we've already got 2 answers for you, so we're ready. There is no scarcity of resources. Because we've already done a budget too. We know that when we talk about deficit spending, we see it as investment, and it comes back in a big way. Secondly, there is no scarcity of solutions. What we have in this country and have had for far too long is a scarcity of moral fusion, social conscience. And it ends now with us and with this movement. And we will see the birthing of a third reconstruction. Reverend Dr. Lee, go ahead.
I'm proud to stand here today as the co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. With these powerful representatives, these original co-sponsors of this amazing resolution. On behalf of the Poor People's Campaign coordinating committees in 45 states, over 2,000 interfaith clergy, and 300 partner organizations, but especially on behalf of Pamela Garrison, a low-wage worker from West Virginia, daughter of a West Virginia coal miner, who reminds this nation that although some say that poverty is a personal failing, that it is our society nation that has the resources to fully address the curse of poverty. A nation that throws away more food than it takes to feed every person, and yet food lines continue to grow. A nation that has 5 empty housing units for every homeless person and family, and yet evictions continue to rise. With us today, I feel the spirit of Pamela Rush from Lowndes County, Alabama, who had raw sewage in her yard, mold in her trailer, was fighting for health care for all, living wages for all, decent housing and education for all, until she died of COVID and the pre-existing conditions of racism and poverty this year. She inspires me. She inspires the entire Poor People's Campaign to fight on, to build a moral fusion movement, to reconstruct society from the bottom up. Today, we have the solutions to fully address the injustices of systemic racism, poverty, ecological devastation, militarism, and this false narrative of religious nationalism. We have the solutions. They're right here. They're right here in this third Reconstruction resolution. And so we must build the political will, the compelling power, the resolve to lift from the bottom, so that all of our society, starting with the poor, the bruised, the battered, the marginalized, the excluded, the underpaid, may rise. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. There's an army rising.
Okay, let me, before members have to leave, I'd just like to recognize those members who are here before we go to our next speaker. Congresswoman Jasper from the great state of Illinois. Great. Member of Energy and Commerce Committee. Congresswoman Gwen Moore from, of course, Wisconsin, a member of the Ways and Means Committee. Congresswoman Sarah Jacobs, who's going to speak in just a minute from freshman class, and Sister Brown Rennan from the great state of California. I have Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, who will be speaking in just a minute from Michigan. Yeah. Congressman Danny Davis from the great state of Chicago, Illinois. Congresswoman Cori Bush will be speaking in just a minute from, again, Mr. Brown Rennan here in the House of Representatives. All right, and let me just say, very briefly, the stories that Reverend Bill Harris and Bishop Barber have raised are so important. We, just in terms of just a bit of background, the stories were told many at the Budget Committee a couple of years ago. The stories were told at a hearing that we had through the Steering and Policy Committee. The stories have been told and people have been present at the Senate. We had a Senate hearing with Senator Warren, and then on beloved Elijah Cummings was there. And so there's been context for making sure that those who we are talking about today were here in Washington, D.C. presented their stories in person before the House of Representatives. So just know, thank you for raising them up, even though they could not be here today. And so now I will ask our sister Congresswoman Cori Bush to come forward. Now, sister Congresswoman Cori Bush is the vice chair. I have the task force, chair of the task force on poverty and opportunity. She's the vice chair of that task force, comes to Congress with lived experiences, but also is on the Judiciary Committee, ensuring that justice and equality for all becomes real.
Good afternoon, everyone. St. Louis and I thank you. I always start with St. Louis and I because St. Louis has to be to the front of everything that I do. I represent that district. St. Louis and I thank you, Madam Chairwoman Lee, for all that you do and all that you are, and for being such a great mentor, and the Task Force on Poverty and Opportunity, as well as Rev. Jayapal and Reverend Barber and Reverend Theo Harris for inviting me to speak here today. As the Task Force Vice Chair on Children, Families, and Communities, as a formerly unhoused person, as a nurse, I have seen firsthand how poverty continues to devastate communities like where I'm from in St. Louis. Where I'm from, 1 in 6 people currently lives below the poverty line. Where I'm from, 1 in 4 children lives in poverty and is denied the opportunity to live a joyous and a healthy life. It is our responsibility as lawmakers, to develop the thoughtful policies that address both the root causes of poverty and help people heal from the trauma that it inflicts on our communities. We rise together, all of us today, to renew our national call to end poverty in our country once and for all. As a single mother, a single mom of 2, working for $7 an hour, I constantly live with the anxiety of not knowing how I was going to pay for my children's clothes when the school says they have to look like this. Constantly worried about how I would purchase food because we need food to live, and food was not an easy thing to come by, especially if it wasn't sodium filled. And how to pay my rent each and every month. That was an actual thing that after the first, I worried about the next first. I didn't have relief. On the first, after I gave that money, if it hit the first, if it wasn't the 7th or the 17th, I was already worried about what was going to happen the next time I had to pay my rent. Being 1 car accident or 1 flat tire, 1 medical injury away from total catastrophe in my life. The catastrophe that causes chronic stress. It causes chronic stress, that's a real thing, and exhaustion and anguish. I lived in anguish even though I walked with hope. Let me tell you, just because you're low income and marginalized and poor doesn't mean you don't have hope. I had plenty of hope, but I woke up to anguish. Anguish knocked on my door every single day and said, hello, you're still broke. I deserved better. It wasn't that I didn't deserve more, I deserved better, and so do every single regular person in our community. We're making real progress to dismantle systemic economic inequality that is harming our children, harming our families, harming our communities. Our resolution today, it represents a new chapter in congressional response to the plight of those among us who have the least. We have to start with those who have the least. And if we don't, we'll be in the same position we are right now, understanding what does the least look like. The least can look like me. The least can look like you. We refuse to accept the systems of oppression that force our community members to live in poverty, because we know that poverty is a policy choice. It's a policy choice, and we choose health and prosperity for our communities instead. Included in this resolution is a resolute demand for a modern system of measuring poverty. We do not support criminalization and policing our communities, and we insist on more investments in social services. Where is the money for our social services? Where is the money? Our health care. It's care for people, for humans. We need that care. We need affordable housing, education, and infrastructure. Let me say, the $50 billion that we will save by withdrawing from Afghanistan could permanently end homelessness. Think about that. That's what we mean when we say poverty is a policy choice. It's an act of structural violence on our children, families, and our communities. And with this resolution, we've come together as lawmakers, as advocates, as people of faith, and as people of conscience, because we choose affirming life over inflicting violence. I urge my colleagues in the House to make the deliberate choice to put the dignity and the needs of our communities above all else. And I thank my colleagues again for their leadership and partnership in this effort. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Representative Bush. We talked earlier about spirit and how when spirits come together, we have no option but to do it. That's right. I mean, that's right. Let me now, and I mentioned our poverty task force, poverty and opportunity task force. I failed to mention it took a while to really, not with these members, but to get our caucus to really focus on issues around low wealth, working families, low wage individuals, poor people, and Congresswoman Jayapal kind of laid that out. But we finally established, they heard us, they heard you, they heard the people of this country crying out for a structure in the Congress. So we established the task force on poverty and opportunity. One of our vice chairs now, Congresswoman Sarah Jacobs, is with us. She's a new member. She's hit the ground running, but also she's helping us with her freshman class. She's the leader of the freshman class to get co-sponsors in our resolution.
the depth of this problem compel us to get started, to start working, to start acting. We've heard from a lot of faith leaders. In my faith tradition, we have a saying: do not be daunted by the enormity of the world's grief. Love justly now, walk humbly now. You are not obligated to finish the task, but neither are you free to abandon it. And let me say one more thing. While this resolution and this movement very rightly centers the voice of people experiencing poverty, it cannot only be the voice of people experiencing poverty who are calling for change. It is on all of us, especially those of us who have benefited from the system as it is, to push for a fairer and more just America. And I'm so honored to be working with you all on this resolution that shows us the way and shows us how we can make an immediate difference. Thank you.
That's right. Congresswoman Jacobs reminded us that this is really a moral issue. It's value-based, and because of that, we come together and we know that we're going to do this. So thank you, Congresswoman Jacobs, and thank you for your leadership on so many issues. Let me now bring forward my a good friend from Michigan, someone who came to Congress and said she wasn't going to wait any more. She brought the issue of water to the forefront. That's right. In our House of Representatives. Yes. She joined my task force, and you don't want me to say what she said to me after a few minutes, like, when are we going to get this? You don't even want to know, because we talk like that with each other. But Congresswoman, I hope you have hope. There are task forces out there some talking, doing what you said, not just sitting around talking. But thank you so much for everything we want to do today.
Thank you so much to my mentor. The Congressional Progressive Caucus assigned Congresswoman Barbara Lee to me, and I was so incredibly grateful. You probably don't even remember. But we used to meet monthly prior to COVID, and I loved it. Sometimes I did have to have that conversation of like, how do you keep going? But I want to take a moment and really acknowledge this movement, and really acknowledge all those in my district and 13 districts strong, which is the third poorest congressional district in the country. With them, we were able to birth the Boost Act, which would uplift 45% of our neighbors across the country out of poverty, giving them up to $3,000 to $6,000, basic income every month. It's the closest thing to universal basic income. It's because of them, all of them, that I'm here fighting against this unbelievably painful experience of poverty in our country. But I want to take this moment, I want you to know, Reverend Theo Harris and Reverend Barber, thank you. Thank you for bringing your faith forward, but also thank you for continuing this fight, even when it seems very difficult. I've gone into many fights myself with you on my side, honestly. And Reverend Barber knows this. He's been to my district several times. But the COVID pandemic, if anything, just exposed just how broken our systems are, how the processes are so broken. And I really, I want to share with you, being a United States Congress member now, and you hear the horror stories of so many of my residents, they were living check by check, and this pandemic had just hit them so hard. But it's when you hear a mother tell me, when am I going to get my child back into early childhood program? And I said, well, I'm going to find you something. Don't worry, I'm going to get you something online. She's like, you don't understand, Rashida. This is where I can get my child fed twice a day. That's just how painful it is on the ground. And so we really have to bring those voices forward here in Congress. Congresswoman Lee talked about this waiting conflict. It's because our residents, our neighbors have been waiting far too long. Everybody here I know wants the same thing. Who doesn't want to end poverty? But I'm moving with a sense of urgency. I'm saying time. We don't have another hour. We don't have another day. We don't have another month. And so I'm hoping with this resolution that we can move with that sense of urgency, because really, truly, our residents can't wait. The pain and the generational trauma that we are allowing to continue to happen in our children that are living in poverty, that's going to continue on. And so I just hope that we really, again, move with, that sense of urgency. I know my residents are so tired. They're so tired, Rev, of being studied. They're so tired.
That's right.
They're like, how much more do you need to know about me living in poverty? poverty. And so really important as we move forward that we build these alliances, and it's so wonderful to see the diversity of the different districts coming together, because I don't think the brokenness in our society of how we address our most vulnerable has touched every single part of our country. So thank you with that, and God bless you.
Congresswoman Lee, can I just take 1 30-second? I know you got another comment, but I want to say something. Congresswoman Jayapal, before she was a congressperson, was in the planning meeting for the Michigan Poor People's Campaign 3 years ago. Did I say Tlaib? I'm sorry, I'm confused. The son got me. Tlaib, Congresswoman Tlaib. And she was there for the training. What I want folks also to understand is two important people. Now, this resolution will take on those who do something and say, we just move folk out of poverty, because what we're going to ask you is, which measurement did you use? Because if you mean you just got somebody to $12,900 a year, because you know the old poverty line says if you make above $12,800 a year, you're no longer poor. Yeah. We're not dealing with that measurement anymore. That's a false measurement. Secondly, we are in a movement. We did 6 weeks of nonviolent direct civil disobedience in action here in 2018. The resolution is the map, the call for the resolve. We as a movement, I want you to know this, are committed to, we've done enough study. That's why we're telling you, we're coming to DC in 2022. We're organizing around the country, and we're committed. What you do in nonviolent action, you have to make sure first people clearly know what you want, why you want it. And then you have to be willing to do everything, including putting your bodies on the line nonviolently, to shift the narrative and build power. Please understand that this time is now. We're calling for the resolve, and we have the resolve of people all over this country. Like the lady I met in Appalachia 2 weeks ago, and we were with her on Monday constantly, and I asked her what was she doing. She said, we're having Taco Monday. I said, why are you having Taco Monday? She said, every Monday we have Taco Mondays to raise money to provide women who work for less than living wage their supplies for their menstrual cycle. She said, we're tired. And if this movement is serious about mobilizing in every way, legislatively, legally, consciously, agitation, all of it in a nonviolent way, then I'm with this movement. I want you to know that's the resolve we have.
Thank you, Bishop Barber. Let me just mention, some say, how practical is this? How are we going to get this done? Well, I want you to know, so much of this resolution already members of Congress have introduced in terms of legislation. We're going to ask for executive orders on some of the provisions. The Democratic Party platform, Bishop Barber testified before the platform committee, so many provisions are in the Biden-Harris Democratic Party platform. So just know this is a very realistic document, realistic resolution that not only gives people dignity, but people hope, and we're going to make sure that we get this done legislatively. Now I'd like to ask our colleague from Maryland to come forward, Congressman Jamie Raskin, who is the protector of our democracy, and especially for low-wage people, for poor people, for low-wealth people, for low-income communities. Thank you so much for being part of this. Thank you for being a co-sponsor.
Thank you so much, Martin Lee. I'm saluting you and Congressman Jayapal for the resolution, Reverend Barber, Reverend Theo Harris. Thank you for your extraordinary leadership. I wasn't here, so I don't know what everybody said, so I just want to say two things real quickly. Okay. And well, one is, you know, people sometimes talk about poverty in some kind of abstract pie-in-the-sky way. We cut child poverty by 50% with one vote. Yeah. This is something that is practical. We can do this. All we need is the political commitment to make it happen. And but having said that, it's going to be very serious business, as Reverend Barber says, because it's going to require the only thing that's ever worked in the country to really redistribute power, which is a mass nonviolent movement. And I want to contrast that with what we experienced on January 6th, which was a violent insurrection. And I want to thank these two great leaders, Reverend Theo Harris and Reverend Barber, for showing America how you actually make constructive change. You don't knock down the windows and beat up the cops and storm the Capitol and overthrow the election. You organize for the election to defend the voting rights of the people and mobilize a mass turnout to win. And we know that you're not using violence even though there are all kinds of undemocratic instruments being used against us.
That's right.
Like disenfranchisement schemes and voter suppression schemes and the filibuster and the gerrymandering of our congressional districts, and still you have made the commitment to nonviolence to move us forward, because it's the only thing that works. Because war doesn't work, and we're seeing that in the Middle East right now. War doesn't work. Forget whether or not you are in principle for or against war. War doesn't work, and violence doesn't work, as I hope we prove to our friends on January 6th. So America needs a new nonviolent movement, and this is it. It has arrived with the Poor People's Campaign. It's here right now. We've got it. And we know how many of our leaders, Reverend Barber, that we've lost to violence in our history. We lost Reverend King. We lost the Kennedys. We lost Malcolm X. There's been a lot of violence against the leaders of nonviolent movements, and yet nonetheless, that's exactly what needs to happen in order to put this moral issue front and center. This is the moral center of American politics right now. So I'm proud to stand for this resolution and all the legislation that we're going to organize underneath it, and I'm proud to be with these two great leaders today.
Thank you.
Thank you. I failed to mention that we had a
That's right.
That's right. We all know that.
We're all praying.
Praying.
And this bill is such an important bill in terms of democratic rights of everybody.
That's right.
That's right.
Right.
We look
right.
to your input and wisdom and making sure everything is constitutional. So thank you very much. Now, I guess to close us out, I'm going to bring forth another woman of faith, a spirited, persistent woman. I remember Congresswoman Glenmore, when she came here, she was determined to get on the Ways and Means Committee. We talked about the means that this country has the resources to end poverty. But that's all she wanted to do. And few cycles went by. Finally, Congresswoman Glenmore is a member of the House Ways and Means Committee.
Yes.
With the means to get this done. So thank you again, Roland. You close us out, okay?
The means. That's right.
Let me just say how honored I am to be here with the faith community, all the other consortium groups, with Reverend Dr. Barber and my sister, Reverend Dr. Liz Theo Harris, who is from Milwaukee.
That's right.
Wisconsin. You know, just saying.
Just
To
saying.
support this resolution sponsored by Rep. Lee and Rep. Jayapal, I am telling you that I am just thrilled. You know, I was sharing before this convocation how in 1968, when we had the first Poor People's Campaign, I wasn't even old enough to vote. And but you know, but I grew up on welfare. I had a baby at 18. You know, I was like Drake. I started from the bottom. Now I'm here. And I'm on the Ways and Means Committee
That's right.
because in 1996, when our governor ended welfare as we knew it, snatched the safety net from up under babies and children,
That's right.
so that he could put them out there at the mercy of the low-wage workforce. I mean, poverty is a deliberate thing, y'all.
Yes, it is.
We do it on purpose.
Yes, it is.
You know, the employers came and said, we can't compete against you giving them Medicaid and food stamps, and you got to take that away from them to force primarily women onto the low-wage workforce. Well, I wanted to be on the Ways and Means Committee, which is a very prestigious committee for that reason. And people looked at me like I was crazy. So, well, if, you know, I want to be on there because all the stuff I care about is under there. TANF, Social Security, Medicare,
That's right.
foster care, you know, half of that bill, the economic impact payments, all that stuff came under the jurisdiction of the Ways and Means Committee. And I say that to say that I stand ready to work with these authors in your famous sermons to put some meat on these dry bones
Meat on the drop. That's right.
of this resolution and have them make this document become a living soul.
That's right.
Okay, you called us a conversation. invocation, but I think it's the benediction that you gave us today. So thank you all for coming and being witnesses to what we're getting ready to do on Monday. And also, if you have any questions that you'd like to ask members, feel free. We're going to have the press conference now because everyone has obligations at the end of the time. But it was important to hear the perspective, the spirit, and the clarity of purpose of all those here. So thank you, Bishop Barber. Thank you, Reverend Phil Harris, for being here.
And Elizabeth, you all have to go back to the hall. We know Liz might take some questions.
Okay. Go right ahead.
A new base
of people introducing this.
In this process, and so many warriors for justice who are here with us. I just want to thank all of you for being here, and everybody will have a chance to at least say 1 minute. We may go a little bit out of order because I'm very pleased to see so many members who I know have something to say about this. And also, I'm so, well, it's an honor, and I'm excited to stand with Bishop William Barber II and Reverend Liz Theo Harris, with whom Congresswoman Jayapal and myself have worked very closely to develop this resolution on poverty, as well as so many allies, IPS, of course, the Poor People's Campaign. We've had several years of input, listening to people around the country, organizing, and coming up with, I think, is a very profound and moral document, but also a practical, progressive document. Reverend Bishop Barber, Theo Harris, and the Poor People's Campaign really are the voice of millions of people from every part of this country, every background, who are coming together, mind you, and demanded that we do what we can do to end poverty and low wages and low wealth in this country. Right. And they are truly warriors for justice and equality. And I'm so proud, I know Congresswoman Jayapal is so proud to have collaborated with them on this and so many issues over the last few years. Our congressional resolution to end poverty is titled The Third Reconstruction, Fully Addressing Poverty and Low Wages from the Bottom Up. Now, Congresswoman Jayapal and I will be introducing this next week, and of course our goal is to seize this moment of reckoning, and that's where we are in this country. We're at this moment of reckoning, to reimagine a better future for systemically oppressed and underserved and marginalized communities, and this is the moment, and so we must seize this time. This critical document, it reflects the state of the 140 million, mind you, who are poor, low wealth, and who are, yes, one emergency away from economic ruin. It also commits the political resolve, and that's why so many members of Congress have joined with us in this, because they understand that we have to have a political resolve to address the interlocking issues of injustices, of systemic racism and poverty, ecological devastation, economic inequality, and to denounce the denial of health care, militarism, and the distorted moral narrative of nationalism and white supremacy that seeks to blame the poor instead of addressing systems that cause poverty. So let me be clear, we are facing a poverty crisis in America. The COVID pandemic, you know, it's just exposed and exacerbated the impacts of long-standing inequities that are the result of generational and generations of structural racism in this country and economic inequality. It's unforgivable that 250,000 people die every day due to poverty and inequality alone, and that is what Bishop Barber kept driving home in this resolution. So we have an opportunity to reflect upon our current conditions and establish a new baseline for anti-poverty and social welfare programs to lift people out of poverty. We now stand at a tipping point, so we must address the devastating consequences of these injustices now. We have to prioritize the needs and demands of the 140 million people suffering each day from poverty and truly build from the bottom up. From housing to health care to welfare, water, education, you know all of the issues which are laid out in this resolution. And so we're calling on Congress and the Biden administration to develop a legislative framework to realize a third Reconstruction to fully address poverty and low wages from the bottom up. And so yes, we do need this third Reconstruction to revive our moral and political commitments to democracy and the founding principles of the country. And so I just want to say to all of those who have been involved with the hearings of town meetings of millions around the country with Reverend Theo Harris and Bishop Barber, we hear you, we see you, and just know you have elected officials here in the House of Representatives, and I know in the Senate, who are going to listen and take your voice into these legislative bodies and do the right thing and move with a vengeance, because we know that we are in a state of emergency. And so now let me bring forth our partner, who is such a tremendous leader on so many issues. I chair of the Progressive Caucus, Congresswoman Camilla Jayapal from the great state of Washington.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Lee. I think everyone knows I wouldn't be in Congress probably except for Congresswoman Lee showing her bravery and courage around the war in Iraq back in the early 2000s. So thank you for your championing, for your leadership of the Progressive Caucus and of all of these issues. And for raising poverty long before anybody else talked about it, and insisting that we talk about it. So I love Barbara Lee. She speaks for me, as she does for so many people. To Bishop Barber, to Reverend Liz Theo Harris, to all the millions of people who make up the movement for the Poor People's Campaign, I thank you for your clarity, for your commitment, for your organizing, and for bringing this struggle to the forefront. We are so proud to be your partners in elevating the faces, the lives, and the people whose suffering can and must be addressed with real action right here in Congress. Yesterday on the floor when I spoke about this resolution, I reminded people that Mahatma Gandhi, a great leader in nonviolence, said that allowing poverty is the worst form of violence. Let me be clear, poverty exists because we allow it to exist. In the wealthiest country in the world, 140 million people are poor because we have allowed it to be so. We have turned our eyes from the suffering of families who do not have enough to eat, from the 32 million Americans who don't even earn $15 an hour, from the 87 million who are uninsured or underinsured, from the structural racism that is built into every one of our institutions, but also the classism that has left behind millions of people who feel unseen and unheard. And as Representative Lee said, the pandemic only shined a bright light on the inequities that existed a long time before, but don't forget that even before the pandemic hit,
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to address the injustice of poverty and low wealth. And let me just say, this pandemic has exposed the toll of long-standing interlocking inequities stemming from structural racism, poverty, economic inequality, ecological devastation, and many more systemic barriers keeping people living on the edge. Our country now stands at a tipping point. 140 million people are poor or one healthcare crisis, job loss, or emergency away from economic desperation. So we must prioritize their needs and allow them and give them the opportunities to live in dignity and with hope. We can realize a third Reconstruction to fully address poverty and low wages from the bottom up, from housing to health care, water, education, and more. We need a third Reconstruction to revive our moral and political commitments to democracy and the founding principles of this country. That's why Congresswoman Camilla Jayapal and I have worked with great leaders such as Bishop William Barber and Dr.